Good morning to all our guests today, both those that I can see and those that I cannot see, somewhere out there on the outer, in the interweb. Today, we're really excited to have our fourth Nation Builder Thought Leadership webinar on land reform. Just a reminder of where these webinars came from. They came from a space where business leaders were expressing that they're really interested in targeting some other issues outside of just social investment that influence how we as business interact in building our nation. And some of the topics that were proposed that we've covered already included social entrepreneurship, we covered engagement with millennials, we covered quality education within our nation, and then fourth up, we have land reform. So I'm really, really excited to tackle this topic. What we're really keen for as well is to have a conversation that is factual, that is not emotionally charged, that is not, we're doing away with the sensationalism that is crowding and overcrowding media nowadays. So that's why I'm particularly honored to introduce both Chris and Temba today as our speakers. So this webinar is going to go on until 12 o'clock. We are going to introduce our speakers, after which later on we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. You can, however, if there's at any stage a question that you'd like to pose to them, you can write it down in the comments or in the Q&A part, and we will then be able to facilitate this to our speakers at a later stage at the end, which is when they'll address them. But for now, we're really just looking forward to an intensive conversation between them and almost being flies on the wall as we listen to this as well. So just to introduce Temba today to all of us. Temba is the director of the Free Market Foundation. He is also the chairman of the Langa Heritage Foundation and trustee of the Helen Suzman Foundation, the Cape Town Carnival, and is also a council member of the SA Institute of Race Relations. So we can see that he is highly decorated. And one of the things that really struck me by his bio is how he was detained at some stage. In the early 1970s, he was a pioneer activist of the Black consciousness movement. So his influence and personal experiences has manifested in his writings and different interventions at large that he's involved in. And they really fuel his desire to contribute to the enhancement of the lives of individuals more broadly. So I'm going to hand over to Kerry as well to introduce our guest from Pretoria, and then we'll proceed with the conversation.
Thank you. So I'm honored to be here with Chris Spencer from AFGRI Group Holdings. He is the Group CEO of AFGRI Group Holdings. But just to give you a little bit of background, Chris was in the merchant banking industry for 14 years in a variety of different positions and overseeing corporate investment and merchant banking. And then he spent 3 years in New York, which I found really interesting, working for ABSA on their structured commodity finance businesses, and then with a specific focus on the Americas. Then Chris joined AFGRI in 2005, and the part that I really love about his bio is his dream for AFGRI. It says, Chris's dream is to see Africa and its farmers, both large and small, rise up to the challenge of feeding themselves and the world over the next 50 years. And that's wonderful. That's such a beautiful dream, and way better than being in AFGRI to do it. So AFGRI plays a critical role in increasing the Africa agricultural productivity by delivering all of the core services farmers need to thrive. And that includes your financing, insurance, mechanization, and grain storage. So Chris really does have a lot of knowledge on the agricultural side as well as on the financial side. And he's actually currently today in a seminar with government. So he's popped out to spend some time with us. They're actually meeting about some farming developments that are coming. And Chris has been in some of the conversations with governments on land reform. So he does have a wealth of knowledge on the topic and also on the implications for the sector. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mr. T here on my left, who's just going to share his opening thoughts and comments regarding land reform.
Okay, very briefly, let me just state up front, before I actually mess myself in the essence of our discussion. I'm an angry man, very angry, because there is an issue in South Africa right now, which poses serious problems for all of us, and that is the resolution that was adopted by Parliament, namely the expropriation of land without compensation. That's very threatening. However, as far as land reform is concerned, from the Free Market Foundation's point of view, there is no need for the EWC. How? Because what is being entertained in terms of the objectives behind the EWC can be attained by simply implementing some policy measures that would not cost the government too much, or definitely will not cost the taxpayer at all, and will definitely not disrupt the racial fabric of this country, which is the case, for example, when it comes to the EWC. And when I was monitoring the debate, around the EWC motion before it was adopted as a resolution, I was very apprehensive. When it was finally adopted as a resolution, I said to myself, gosh, we must brace ourselves for very, very difficult times ahead, because if you undermine private property rights, you are going to hurt the economy. One of the implications of that would be that foreign direct investment will be deterred, and that investment domestically would also be negated. And so there will be an outflow of foreign direct investment going to other countries. And these have been my concerns. But there is another concern that I have with regards to the EWC. And I had predicted this, and it is good to be vindicated. I feel so good about this, good about bad news. I feel very good that I've been vindicated. I said to myself, tossing and turning in bed, when the motion had been adopted, I said to myself, oh, heavens, what's going to happen now is that the ochlocratic forces are going to be unleashed. That's more ochlocracy. And they're going to be unleashed. And lo and behold, the following day, we had lots of people all over the country claiming land left, right, and center, and they could not be controlled. I had further predicted that the ochlocratic forces would actually call the shots, because it would be difficult for the politicians or any political party to contain them, especially thinking about the elections around the corner in 2019. And so that has been vindicated. And so we're seeing all these outbreaks, so-called spontaneous outbreaks throughout the country that we have witnessed. There is still more to come. That is why I'm talking about feeling good about being vindicated, feeling good about bad news. But this is bad news. We do not need this in this country. We really do not. One has to cast one's eyes on Zimbabwe and several other countries, where a country that used to export food now is going around shaking the begging bowl for all sorts of assistance, and people coming over to South Africa. More than 3 million Zimbabweans have come over to this country, as a result of what? As a result of what we here are contemplating. I remember the words of George Santayana, the US philosopher. He had said in his own words, which have been paraphrased many a time by different people, he had said, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. It is so strange that we are contemplating this disastrous, socio-economical disastrous measure that is known as the expropriation of land without compensation.
Awesome. Sean, Chris.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I think from my side, maybe just to set the background. So, firstly, I'm involved in farmers on a daily basis, small and large farmers. So, AFCRI is seen by lots of people as just a representative of the big commercial farmers, but we also do a lot of work in development and upskilling of small-scale farmers. So, it's interesting to see the view from those farmers in terms of this process of expropriation. You have different views. Representing the commercial farmers as a starting point is always, and we've heard the leader of the Agri-SA saying last week that from their point of view, they don't support the change in the constitution at all. I think for us, we look at it to say what is needed in South Africa is a fair, equitable environment where people have security and certainty around land ownership, and where they have the ability to grow wealth on the land that they own with a title deed on that particular piece of property. So that necessarily mean that we don't want to see a dilution of the rights that we have as property or farm owners in South Africa. That view is shared not only amongst commercial farms, big commercial farms, but also amongst small farmers. And when you speak to these farmers, their right to have title deed and ownership is key to them. In one of the meetings, we actually had the ability or the presence of one of the farmers, quite a big farmer in the Limpopo area, saying that he's bought a piece of land, he's bought his house, double-story house, over 20 years, but he has no right to that land as a title ownership. And I think that is something that we need to understand from the outset. It does also mean that in the history of South Africa, there are certain historical faults and problems that we have that need to be addressed. Now, the question that I ask myself many times, looking at the president's approach to this since the ANC announced or voted on the resolution, was twofold. The one is the impact that such a resolution will have on South Africa, and the second one was, what is the process that we need to follow? I think we need to realize uniquely to South Africa, land has become a huge political play under the previous regime, if I can call it that. The question is, how do the new President Ramaphosa actually address that in a new environment that he wants to set? I actually felt that the approach that he has taken to open up a debate and allow everybody who wanted to participate in the debate to participate and submit their own ways and their own proposals on how they want to address it actually was the right way to do it, because talking about these issues means that at some point in time everybody will have their say and we will get to a point of proposal. I must say, and we will get later to that, the ANC in the meetings that we attended had a specific approach. From a process point of view, as a corporate operating with these farmers, we feel that the approach must be that there must be an end to this process that is equitable to everybody, that's fair to everybody, that actually give ownership to people and the right to ownership to farmers. And I almost want to stick to that as a background to the discussion, because I do think that we can have many debates in terms of Zimbabwe, where Zimbabwe comes from. It was interesting in one of the in-conversation discussions at NAMPU that one of the previous finance ministers of Zimbabwe said, we never expropriated land without compensation. We always expropriate land with compensation. We just stopped paying at some point in time. And that was an interesting approach from Minister of Finance there in the late 1990s, because it actually said that they felt that the payment for those lands should have been from either UK or some first world country. But that was the approach they've taken. Obviously, we use Zimbabwe as a worst case scenario and almost the fears that farmers have in terms of that going to be potentially the outcome. But from a process point of view, opening up a discussion, having a debate around land reform and allow the light to shine, so to speak, on the process is not necessarily a bad thing. But as a start, maybe as an intro to the debate, that would be our approach, is to make sure that we get to that point of fairness in the process.
So Temba, just sharing some of your views on the pros, cons of land reform.
Yeah, okay, if we're talking about land reform and we have to accept that maybe in the same breath I will be commenting on the EWC. The point is, first of all, the EWC, the resolution states as follows: expropriation of land without compensation. Now, one of the things that really frustrate me is that because the business sector, generally speaking, has its tail between their legs, they don't really seriously engage the issue itself. Always when they comment, they start out by saying, well, the objectives are fine and we subscribe to this, but we're going to do it differently. That concedes the argument, that concedes some ground. And the message has to come out quite clearly, quite precisely, quite frankly, that there shouldn't be this EWC amendment effected to the Constitution. That is a message that should come out clearly. There should not be any debate around this issue. There shouldn't be any debate around this issue. Because we know, first of all, let me just mention the fact that sometimes some of our South African counterparts, and be they on an ethnic or racial basis, some people think, oh, this resolution is going to be implemented to the detriment of whites and Afrikaners particularly, and especially farmers, and that the blacks are not going to be affected at all. That's very, very naive, because the thing is, first of all, in the Constitution, you cannot have a clause effected that's going to allow for an exemption on the part of any other sector of the country. Not at all. It has to be a law of general application. And this is what this proposal is. It is a law of general application. It is going to affect everybody. Now, some people think about this measure in the short term and listen to the politicians say, no, we are not going to seize the land that falls within the jurisdiction of the Ingonyama Trust, for example. No, just relax. But the point is that would be naive to accept that, because these amendments spells it out very clearly. And the thing is, if one were to look at, say, a couple of elections down the line, why don't you take, this is very important, why don't you take a long-term view of the Constitution? And so a couple of elections down the line, maybe 2 elections, maybe 3 elections, maybe 4 elections down the line, there might be a government makeup that would be totally different to what prevails at the moment. It might, for example, say, be a ruling alliance that might comprise, say, the Nguni speaking, of which I'm part of, and say the Afrikaner speaking or the English speaking, and wanting to sort out who, maybe some other ethnic group like the Sotho speaking or the English speaking and so on. And this resolution is in place. It will be very easy for this to be implemented. It will be very, very, very easy. And so everyone's property, everyone's land is vulnerable in terms of this actual resolution as it stands. So from the Free Market Foundation's point of view, and also from my personal point of view, we do not need this resolution. But let me just say something here, because sometimes some people, the architects behind this resolution, sometimes they cite Saul T. Blakey's book, and conveniently some parts of the book, and they say, well, you see, Saul Blakey would support this. No, not at all. I studied that book from about 20 years ago, and then what I did was, when this issue was under discussion, I went through every page very laboriously over and over again, and I can attest to the fact that Saul T. Blakey would find it inconceivable that after 1994, when apartheid had been dismantled, that there is this resolution in place, Saul Blakey was very vehemently opposed to the 1913 Natives Land Act. When it was adopted, he had said the following words: awaking on the morning of June 20, 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth. Now, with what is being contemplated now in terms of the EWC right now, I have encountered many, many people and interacted with lots of people. I can tell you right now that many, many whites are starting to feel like pariahs in the land of their birth. They were born here. They are South Africans. They are starting to feel somehow being excluded. And this measure has to be tackled. The gloves are off. It has been tackled head on, and no dilly-dallying, no diplomacy, no nonsensical stuff about, well, that it can be done properly and so on. No, no, no. We do not need the EWC. Now, as the Free Market Foundation, we have propounded some proposals that would not make it necessary for any EWC amendment to be effective to the Constitution. One of them is that we have said, and we advocate this, over the years we have been advocating this, and we insist that it will be easy to implement this at the stroke of a pen, at no cost to the taxpayers at all. And that is the government, which has acknowledged that it has superfluous land that it owns, the government should parcel out that land on the basis of one family, one plot, for indigent people, for poor people, right across the racial lines. Now, I have been engaged by some people who only tend to see things in terms of color. And they've said, well, no, let's just focus on poor black people. So I said, no, we're moving forward now. We're talking about Mandela, Bishop Tutu, as Bishop Tutu were talking about, they were ushering us into the Rainbow Nation situation. And so let's move away from color. Let's not have any statute that is based on the identity of people, individuals, as being of white or color or black or pink or whatever the case might be. And let's move away from that. And so parceling out pieces of land to poor families would mean that, number crunching the situation, the people who benefit the most would be black people by sheer numbers. And then there will be those few, there are poor whites, there are poor Indians, there are poor people from other sectors of the nation. And the thing is, who will benefit the most? It will be black people, the poor black people, by sheer numbers. And so, this is a high moral ground proposal that does not look at color at all. And so now what the government could do is, now with the land that it has in place, is they identify families on the basis of poor families and so on. Now, it's another question as to how one would define the family. Would it be constituted by, say, the father, mother, and the children, and so on and so forth? That's another debate, but the principle is that the land should be parceled out to poor people out there. And then the government, what government could do would be to lay out the basic infrastructure, the roads, the water, the water carriage system, and also street lighting. And that's it, And then you say to family, hey, here's your plot, and it is legally titled on a freehold title basis. They would take ownership of that, and they would feel so good about that. You know, when people own land on the basis of that being legally recognized as freehold title property, it's amazing what happens. It is amazing what happens, because Hernando de Soto, in his book, The Mystery of Capital, he details and explains self-evidently in an axiomatic manner that when people occupy property and their property is not registered in their name, it is dead capital. It has no economic significance whatsoever. However, at the stroke of a pen, when the occupants of that land, of that property, are given a freehold title, unencumbered freehold title, the whole thing changes overnight, just like that. What happens is that dead capital becomes active capital. It becomes part of the economy, and the thing is, there is a logic when it comes to actual ownership of private property.
Temba, can I pause you at that point right there and allow for Chris to just interject with some of the thoughts on what you're saying as well?
Sure.
Thank you very much. I would like to maybe just take a step backwards in terms of the actual reason for land reform and the process that's currently happening. I think one needs to realize in the last 24 years, nothing has changed a lot in terms of the geographics of production of food in South Africa. And there's a process that's obviously got to a point where people felt that, especially under the previous president, where a lot of the negatives were thrown in the way of white South Africa. And I'm sorry to bring that from a political point of view, but the reality is the reason why this debate was opened up was for a couple of reasons. One is that political environment was felt that there's a transfer of land that needs to take place from black South Africans or from white South Africans to black South Africans. So that's one thing that we need to realize. The second thing that we need to realize is that the production of farms and the usage of farms for production of food in South Africa was still primarily done by the white commercial farmer. So to open up this debate, one needs to say to yourself, okay, how do you deal with that in the context of land reform and potentially changing that from a current scenario that was at that point in time the business of the day. And the proposal from the debate was, let's open it up, look at the resolution. The ANC came out, they decided on the resolution clearly on the basis that there should not be any negative impact on food security in the country, and there should not be any negative impact on the economy itself. If one realized that the economy itself, over 158 billion, if I remember the numbers correct, are lent into the agricultural environment by the South African banking society, secured by land and property. So if you get to a point where we say the worst fears of the country is a Zimbabwe scenario, you actually place the whole of the South African banking society under huge risk, systemic risk, as a result of potential downgrading and dilution of property ownership and property rights, and also the dilution of value on that property. So that will have a systemic risk in our financial sector, which will have obviously a huge negative impact on our economy. So if we take the process and we take a leap of faith in the ANC resolution of saying there's a process that they embarked on, should not have negative impact on those areas and industries, then one needs to ask yourself the process, but why then do that? So the only reason can be a political one to answer the question, that it's a political process to ensure that the people buying into the political process have the trust in the government of the day, where they will put right that is wrong to the benefit of all South Africans. Now, in that instance, it actually comes back to the previous point that I made in the sense of fairness to everybody in South Africa. Does it mean that owning a farm today by a white farmer is unfair? I don't believe it is. It does mean that we need to have access for all people of South Africa to have access to farmland, and they need to support to be able to buy that farmland. If you look at the South African farming community today, 95% of those farmers, I would imagine, at some point in time over the last 100 years, 150 years, had access to some sort of support base from government, whether it's been a loan from Land Bank, whether there's some sort of support base from the wheat boards or the grain boards. One doesn't know, but those institutions, historical institutions, were created with the sole purpose of supporting the agricultural environment. So currently in South Africa, the South African farmer, be it white or black, is probably the worst supported by the government in terms of those development support, whether it's grain boards or whatever the case may be. So there should be, if one look at redressing the past, it's not just about land itself. It's also about supporting base through finance. It's also about supporting base through development agencies. It's also about supporting base just in terms of mentorship and soil development. I think those are issues that we need to address. I fully agree in the sense that, you know, we don't need a change in the constitution, but we do need to get to a point where everybody has access to land. We also do need to get to a point where people in South Africa, poor people in South Africa, have access to potentially catering for themselves in terms of food production. How do we do that? I think there's a wrong assumption that if you have a piece of land, you can produce food. That's not necessarily the case, because you need skills, you need development, you need finance. And I think we need to get to a point where if you break it down to land reform, worst case is Zimbabwe scenario. I don't think that's in anybody's interest. That's certainly not where we want to be, and certainly not where government or the ANC is saying we need to go. I think it's more about understanding what is currently the situation in terms of land ownership. I don't think we have a proper land audit done. We have numbers coming from government and various independent parties in terms of their own land audits that's been done. Temba referred to the thousands of farms. There's 4,400 farms currently owned by the government of South Africa. So it's not necessarily just passing land from a commercial farmer to a small-scale farmer. It's also making sure that the land being bought over the previous 24 years can be passed on to productive units or created as productive units to small-scale farms that can be supported, whether it's by government or places like Land Bank or by places like AFGRI in terms of development support. So I'm just thinking that it's a much more complex scenario than just thinking about it in the sense of a black farmer and a white farmer. It's much more complex in the terms of trust land, in the terms of Ingonyama trust, in the sense of just a poor individual that own a piece of land just outside, not even a big piece, it's really just a housing piece, and not having full title deed on that house. How does anybody create wealth if you can't be in a position where you buy land and actually build that land up over time, or even property, or even owning your own house because of full title deed? So the land issue, unfortunately, and the potential change in constitution is much more complex than I think we initially thought, or initially was made out to be. I fully agree in the sense that at the end of the day, nobody wants to see a change in the constitution that open up a can of worms in terms of just passing land from one to another. I don't think that's the intention from government, though. It's clear that if there's going to be a change, that there will only be a change with certain conditions to it, and that's at least the impression that we're getting from these discussions. But those discussions are far from over. I don't think we can sit here today and clearly state whether this decision, yes, the ANC has adopted the decision, and whether that decision will hold in government, in parliament when it finally comes back to it, it's gonna be another discussion, another debate. All I'm that the process must be fair and it must be equitable when we get to the end of the process.
All right, Temba, are there any comments that you might have on what Chris has just said, and also maybe sharing from your practical experiences of land reform? I know there's the Guate project as well that you've been involved in.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks, Chris. What I want to point out, something that we really need to take cognizance of, is the study that's been generated by the South African Institute of Race Relations on the issue as to whether people prefer land or money. And that very intellectually scrupulous study has proven that 2/3 of the people prefer money as opposed to be given land, be it a farm or whatever. And that's for understandable reasons. And one cannot say, look, these are naive people who just want to grab the money and go into a shebeen and drink up all that money and so on. No, that would be rubbish, because I've had some politicians, making those kinds of allegations. But the point is, I think it's an informed decision on the part of the people who have said, no, we'd rather take the money. Because the thing is, not that many people can withstand the rigors and challenges of farming. Not that many people. Let me state this one thing. First of all, if you are a farmer, you have to get up very early in the morning. A friend of mine who was the secretary of Wool South Africa at some stage in Newport, when I would call him, the wife would say, oh no, he's out there looking after some lamb and so on, it might give birth or whatever and so on. So when can I call him? Oh, I don't know when you can call him, because he's in and out, he's like a stranger to me, And that's been the general case with people in agribusiness generally, especially when it comes to livestock, and also when it comes to cultivating crops as well. There are so many factors that keep you on your toes, keeping you stressed if you're running a farm. I think people are starting to realize that. And the other thing is, when we look at land reform, I'm going to come to that point of Kaya property titling. When we look at, what for me I find disturbing is that this is as a result of the machinations of politicians. And that is, people are focused more now on land, on farms. They're not thinking that much about land. They're thinking about actually operational farms. They have their eyes on that. That's what they're entertaining. Whereas many people, that's not the majority. That's not the majority of people. Because if you look at who is vociferous in terms of pushing the EWC agenda, it is the politicians. They are doing that because they have not the interest of the people at heart, not the interest of of the poor people, of the poorest of the poor. No, not at all. We shouldn't buy into that, the superficial story. They are thinking about the elections because politicians always think in numerical terms. And they think in terms of, well, it seems like the majority of people are behind the EWs, but that is not the case. That is not the case. However, politicians can be also naive because they are thinking that the majority of people are thinking along those lines. And so maybe we might catch big time come election 2019. Now, that I have to state. So I argue that what we need to do to deal with all the challenges that confront us in this country is that we need to look at the big picture. We need to bring the big picture to bear on everyone's minds. And so that means we look at the economy as a whole. And that challenge is to increase the economy. The economic pie has to be increased. When it is increased, it means that there are going to be more people participating in the economy as entrepreneurs, and some of them being employees, all being part of the wealth creation process that would also generate jobs. And that begs the question as to how that can be achieved. Very easy, very, very easy. All the government has to do is just to get the hell out of the way of the entrepreneurs, of the business people, of the business community. Get the hell out of the way and get off the backs of the the business community, because it is the business community that generates wealth, that generates jobs. Governments do not. Governments pretend to generate work by embarking on public works programs at taxpayers' expense. At taxpayers' expense. And the government pretends that it is generating wealth. It doesn't. It consumes wealth. We've seen this with the VPS story and all sorts of issues, that have come to the fore. We've seen this. And so what the government needs to do at the stroke of a pen is just simply to look at existing legislation, existing policies, and identify those policies that impede the spirit of enterprise. Meaning that to make it easy for people to go into business, to lower the cost of running business, to make it easy for people to be employed by relaxing the existing labor laws. That is how the economic pie can grow. This is very, very important. That is how people will be employed. Now, let's not wait. Now, what the government is doing is staging these very costly, unnecessary, futile exercises known as job summits. There have been several job summits in the past. What did they deliver? Nothing at all. And likewise, this one's not going to deliver anything. It's not going to deliver anything. Now, what is needed is that we need to prevail on the government to retrieve its claws out of the economy and allow people to interact economically, so long as their interactions do not entail force of fraud. Do not entail force of fraud. That is what you should tell the government.
Thank you, Temba. In closing, Chris, could you maybe comment on some of the things, if you'd like to comment, and also just share moving forward as your closing statement, where do you see this going?
So maybe I would like to think a little bit ahead. If we think 2050, where South Africa will probably in that state have about 86 to 90 million people. If you think about currently we produce 16 million tons in a very good year of grain, we will probably need, we utilize probably on average 11 million tons of that grain. So there is a bit of additional which we export, depending again on weather. In a drought year like the last year, and even in Cape Town on the wheat, you will import, net import. So we're very thin in terms of production. So if you think about a bigger population, we would need to increase the agricultural activities in South Africa to ensure that we grow, that we are a continued supporter of our people from products produced by ourselves. I think if you then pull that back to the current debate, I think it's important to understand that it's not necessarily wrong of the process and of government to try to increase productive activity. The issue is it's sometimes wrong to think that we need to take from one to give to another one. I think that one of the professors in one of the debates actually said at one stage, if you take an elephant and you cut it in half and pass it across, you still get one dead elephant. You need to increase the elephant to produce the second or third one. I think that's the approach that we need to take. I do also think that in order to achieve that, we need to get to a point where you have access to land, and that you can increase the productivity of land for small-scale farmers. I want to make the point again, I fully understand getting a way of business to operate, and I fully agree with Tim on that point. I do actually think that we need more than that, because in South Africa, just for business to operate, yes, we will create jobs. I think policies is hindering us to grow jobs. But I also think that we need to work together to find the unemployed at the moment, find ways for them to get into employment, and to change the face of South African economy in the sense of bringing up more black businessmen that can participate in the economy, and support those black businessmen in terms of the way expanding the growth. So if you, in my mind at least, I do think there should be a much more pragmatic approach of looking 50 years ahead, making sure that in 50 years we can still produce products, and then all the activities that we're talking about now, align that to your 50 years food security plan for the country and for Southern Africa, because as we know already now, the western parts of the country is getting drier, the eastern parts are getting wetter. It's going to happen in Southern Africa. So how do we cater for ourselves and for our children and grandchildren if we don't look 50 years ahead, 80 years ahead? People like China is doing that. I mean, you see a lot of Chinese government officials in Africa making sure they secure product for their own people on a long-term basis where they're going to import from. We're currently focusing on the process. We want to try and we want to diverse land, and we want to pass land from one to another one. I think the key focus must be, how do you do that in the sense of making sure you keep current productivity and you enhance current productivity, you support current farmers, but also create new farmers in the process. We've seen a reduction in commercial farms from 60, I think it was 68,000 farmers 12 years ago, 15 years ago, where today they talk about 32,000 farmers or 28,000 farmers, depends on which agency you ask. So we see a reduction in commercial farmers. We've seen a reduction in maize crop in terms of land being farmed for maize crop. Some of that land, yes, did go to game farming, but also some of that land became unproductive. And I must say, in terms of the process of growth, you're not going to get an economy growing if you fully agree, if you don't change policies. But you need an environment where there's an engagement for government to understand how they need to change those policies. And only through that engagement you will get to a fully understandable base of creating a secure environment for our children in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Temba. It's been such a wonderful discussion. I think it's been an exceptionally rounded discussion, looking both the agricultural perspective and what the needs are in the next 50 years for our country. I found that fascinating. And then looking at it from an economic perspective and just the kind of economic growth that we need in our country. What kinds of things need to change in the next few years, and what kinds of things we need to keep in mind for the long-term view. So it's been a wonderful conversation with both of you. Thank you so much to both of you for your time. And I hope everybody that's been in on the webinar has enjoyed the conversation with us. We've run out of time, so sorry, we're not going to be able to answer any of the other questions. But we'll be sure to make this webinar available to you, and hopefully we can do something similar in the future and answer some of these questions. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks very much.